Okay, look. And there's that fun recording notification. The new changes to Zoom, right? Well, let's get started. Aloha, everyone. I'm Olani, and welcome to the July NYCP monthly talking stick session. Let's go ahead and get this cleaned.
This presentation was produced under U.S. Department of Education contract number GS00F115CA with Synergy Enterprises, Inc. The views expressed herein do not necessarily represent the positions or policies of the U.S. Department of Education. No official endorsement by the U.S. Department of Education of any product, commodity, service, or enterprise mentioned herein is intended or should be inferred.
Awesome. Now that we've been disclaimed, we're just going to go over our talking stick agenda. Just want to remind you that really the purpose of these talking stick sessions are really to have a conversation, either with the grantees and OIE or the grantees among themselves around maybe challenges or successes that they're facing, and just really an opportunity to share. Back in May, on our talking stick session, there was an interest sort of thrown out by several members around looking at community needs assessment. And so in our June talking stick session, we went over and we looked at the NIES 2019 study, and we looked at some of the data related to programs. And then we didn't get to the needs assessment place. And so today we're going to be really focusing on sort of the needs assessment. And really, Tracy and I are going to be doing providing some context, but really the discussion and the sharing and the questions is your opportunity, and it hopefully will meet your needs. So again, we're going to do some welcome introduction, really focus on need assessment. And then towards the end, we'll be looking at some resources and tools. Again, that was something that was communicated of interest. And then at the end, we'll be sharing upcoming events. Great, so I see we have Donna's on. Hey, Donna.
Hi. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us at this session.
Thank you. And then also joining me today will be sort of tag teaming this between Donna and then Tracy. One of my team members is joining us. We'll be walking through this conversation with you folks.
Okay, so I'll get us started off here with our conversation today. Glad to see everybody's with us. Last time we got together, we had just a little bit of time at the end of our session to get some of your input about what you know, and you know, we recognize that some of you might not be aware of the last time a needs assessment was conducted for your program, but we were kind of towards the end of the session when we put up this poll, and I know some folks had to jump early to their next meetings and such things, so we wanted to pick up where we left off and give you an opportunity to reflect, and maybe you've learned something since our last session. So maybe we'll get some more updated numbers with our poll today, but we just wanted to start off the conversation with if you know, when was the last time a needs assessment was conducted for your program? Was it within the last 6 months, within the last year? Maybe it was more than five years ago, and if you don't know, that's an option as well. This is not a gotcha moment. We just kind of want to get a sense of our community and where you're at with this type of activity. So you should see that up on your screen right now. Go ahead and pop in your answer there. It looks like we have, let's see, about 11 of the 20 of us on here. So maybe if you haven't responded, go ahead and drop your answer in there. Looks like we have kind of an even distribution so far. So about the same number of people, between 4 and 5, saying either within the last year or within the last 5 years. And then some folks who aren't sure when the last needs assessment may have been conducted. So we've got 17 folks now responded. So maybe there's more than one of you from programs on the call today. That's okay. You can go ahead and answer. Even so, so while you're finishing up that, and I think we'll be able to show those results once we get a few more responses in there. We want to just take a couple of minutes now and take a few of your thoughts and reflections to these questions here. So for those of you who have taken know of a recent needs assessment for your program, maybe you can share just a little bit with us. It looks like about 6 of you say within the last year. How have you gone about that? Maybe just share, just give us a little bit of insight if anybody would like to volunteer.
Good morning, this is Laura, and
Hi, Laura.
we did it through SurveyMonkey and telephone interviews and Zoom meetings.
And were those Zoom meetings, and so you did interviews, and then were those Zoom meetings like a focus group kind of activity?
They were with the school district administrators, including the superintendents and principals, and sometimes a teacher and a title, what is it, 6 and 1 coordinators would jump on too in migrant ed. It was a lot of work. There's no 2 ways around it.
It can be. There's a number of steps involved. And I see we have a question in the chat box too. One of your fellow grantees is wondering how long ago that was done.
I did those all in 2020, including the interviews with our elders.
Nice. So you did phone interviews with elders?
Phone and Zoom. We have quarterly meetings with the elders from our 7 communities. So with those that we were able to get a hold of by phone, we did. And then during the elder council meetings, we would address the group there was usually about 40 elders who attended.
Wow, that's a great number. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, a lot of nice different methods of getting input there. Another question we had for the group is, were there any particular models, frameworks, or maybe tools that helped you use to conduct that needs assessment? I guess another way of saying that were like, what kinds of resources may have helped you get your needs assessment done? Anybody want to come off mute and just share a few words? Laura says she just ran around crazy with like your head was chopped off. Having a team, a support, or at least a couple of others to help get that needs assessment done can be a really valuable asset. Yeah, so maybe as we're talking through some of the examples and sharing here, if you think of something and want to drop it into the chat box, you can too. Olani just typed in there too that some of the tools that we see are the SWOT analysis that where you look at the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Using data to consider those different things, or maybe you were using a logic model to help guide that needs assessment. Here's a question that probably several of you could speak to, but we've got time for a couple of shares if you want to come off mute. What challenges did you encounter while conducting a needs assessment? It's a busy just getting it organized and having enough people to support the work. Maybe that's one challenge. Are there others? Yeah, Tanya, I think that's a challenge that others probably encounter as well. Get the lack of responses. You want a good response when you put out surveys or or when you're inviting folks to be interviewed or participate in a focus group. Anybody else experience that challenge?
Yes, we did when we were trying to do ours, and that's why we tackled the problem from so many different angles, especially since I was just hired 6 weeks before the pandemic lockdown. So our community members did not know who I was in that. So, that was a huge challenge because we needed to have relationships built before I jumped in, but I needed so much information as to what our 7 communities needed that we just had to go forward the best way that we could. We're kind of happy with the response that we got because we did talk to so many different people. It was almost like using the community readiness model, you know, from the Tri-Ethnic Center at the University of Colorado, where you try to identify one problem. And what we did is we asked folks pretty much what were the successful things that were happening in schools and what were the things that they wished were in school, and what challenges were the students facing, you know, so that, you know, usually with the community readiness model, you only choose one question to try to answer, but I needed so much information that we had to modify it a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's really important, being able to modify it to suit your needs. And I think you brought up a really great step in the process too, is really being clear about what questions you're trying to answer and what information you need. That's really important. And thank you for sharing that model with us too. Anybody else before I take us to the next slide here and we share a little bit more about the steps of a needs assessment? Yeah, if you think of any other challenges, too, definitely feel free to, you know, drop those in the chat box and come off mute. We really want to encourage some sharing and dialogue amongst all of you today. So let's start maybe with just so that we're all on the same page about what we mean when we're talking about a needs assessment and really what it is. On the screen right now, we have some bullet points with some definitions about what a needs assessment is. So I'm going to give you just a minute or two to read that over. And then I'm going to ask you if you could type into the chat box or maybe come off mute and say aloud a word or a phrase that's on the screen that seems really important about a needs assessment. So once you've read that on the screen now, is there any word or phrase that jumps out to you as being particularly important here? Systemic. Chris agrees. Systemic examination is the word that stuck out. Patricia as well. Would anybody be willing to come off of mute and just say a couple words about why you picked out that word or that phrase?
Hey, Tracy, I can come off mute. And I was going to
Great.
actually mention the gap that exists. I think that's a large one for us. And it says the current state and desired state of an organization. In reality, for us, we're trying to get to an average of outside of our community. And that's one of the big things for us is how can we just get to that minimum, basically? How can we bring our students up to that average. And that gap is quite large right now for us, unfortunately.
Thank you, Ryan.
Hi, this is Allison from the Blue Lake Rancheria, and I wanted to talk about the needs assessment as a part of an asset-based community development premise, so that yes, there are gaps, but we also have to recognize what assets we do have in place that can then be utilized, and perhaps maybe they're unrecognized at this point. So if we're doing a needs assessment, we also need to incorporate what do we actually have that maybe is being undervalued or underrecognized. And maybe that's the gap there, where you have something, but the gap is not recognizing it or utilizing it to its full capacity. So just wanted to point that out, that what you have should also be recognized.
That's a great point.
And I agree with her. When we did our assessment, we asked what was working, what was successful. And so we're trying to build on those. But we also tried to take a more holistic approach, because we didn't just look at the school education data. We actually looked at the youth behavior health risk data. And then we looked also to our tribal health organization, the biggest one here, and looked at the data that they had been collecting around mental health in general within our communities. And then from there, we were trying to figure out, well, okay, here's what's working in all of the, that comes out across all these data points that we're looking at. And here are the challenges. And what we've been doing is focusing on strength-based to everything. And that's been really so embraced by our elders in our communities, because we don't come in saying, okay, we know this, students are not performing well in this area. We just go, well, here's something we found out that works. How can we bring it to all 7 communities? How can we make sure all the Alaska Native and American Indian students have access to this service? And then we go from there.
Thank you for sharing that example. I think that's some really great points and examples when we're approaching this kind of work. And the other thing that I heard too, Laura, in your sharing just now was tapping into other data sources, right, or other needs assessments that have may help inform your work as well. So not starting totally from scratch. Excellent. Well, thank you for sharing that. Keep it coming here. I'm going to turn it back over to Alani now, so we can dig into some of these areas.
Yeah, thanks, Tracy. That was really thank you, Ryan, Allison, and Laura, for sort of teeing up this next piece of discussion is really the why. I think all of you folks are talking about the whys you were doing it and the way in which you were achieving that why and answering your why. So here are just some why you would want to do a needs assessment. And so again, we would love for you to just sort of look over this and maybe share in the chat, or again, please come off mute to share maybe one of these that really sort of resonates with you and why you are thinking or are currently doing, or maybe did a needs assessment. And maybe it's all of the above. Sorry, and sort of aside while you guys are thinking and maybe writing in the chat, one of the other things I've seen a lot is that people are having to reassess, after the pandemic. It's a little difficult to look, you really like the data and the information that you get pre-pandemic to really start to think about, has that actually changed? And so maybe the pandemic is another why you might want to do a needs assessment. Oh, yeah, so thanks, Tanya. she's writing in the chat that she thinks it helps give ownership to the community we serve, exactly, when they're able to participate. Yeah, great point. And Laura, the pandemic was our big why. Yeah, I mean, I really agree. Sometimes you really have to look at what's going on and what's changed, right? So many things have changed. Oh, and that you're a new department. Yeah. So things can actually change. Sometimes, you might be preparing for a new program year or gearing up for maybe potential grants you think might be coming down the track. That's another reason why people do. Okay, great. So,
Um,
can we, oh, go ahead, Ryan.
I was gonna share with this, yes, the grants is great when you have the information and you can show the need for that certain grant. But also once you're utilizing those funds, working with outside vendors and them noticing a gap or an area where they can help and actually having that data to prove that their program is working. So I think it works great with external vendors as well.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. And yeah, and Lisa's chiming in and agreeing with ownership is a great word. And so like Ryan, what you were saying, it's ownership, not just of your organization or your immediate stakeholders, but also like maybe potential partners, right? And owning and becoming part of your whole improving the community. Awesome.
I was gonna also say something about a needs assessment can also tell you, this is the way we use things like this, what can our citizens do best together? What do we need some outside help with? And then what is something that we can't do ourselves and we can only do with outside help? Outside people have to provide it. So what's by ourselves, what's in joint effort, and what has to be provided from the outside? That helps clarify for us how to prioritize our planning and our money, and what do we know we have to go and contract for, things like that, just to throw that out there.
Yeah, no, that's a great example of a why, and then also a how to use the information you're getting from the needs assessment to, impact your community. Oh, we can move on, Tracy. That's cool. So again, you guys can continue to like put stuff into the chat. And then if you have anything, raise your hand and come off mute. But we did logic model in June, and we also did data-driven decision making, and I'm sure a lot of these systems you're going to look at are like very similar, right? And so there's the plan where you really want to sort of plan your needs assessment, who's going to be involved, the timeline, what tools you're going to use, maybe what is your why, really being maybe specific or being community wide. Also collect and organize data. What is the data you need to gather? I think Laura had some amazing methods in order to gather data that can also be feedback from community and engaging different parts of the community and stakeholder groups. Interpreting that information, once you get the data, what do you do with it? Going through and interpreting that information. And from the interpreting information is to determine priorities and then connect that into implementation. And so again, you folks are all running programs. And so sometimes when you do a needs assessment, you have to relook at how are the priorities you sort of have been gleaned from the needs assessment going to be integrated into your current operations. And I think Allison had a great example of looking at what you can do by yourself, what you need to do with partners, and what needs to be done outside. And so that's a whole part of looking at implementation. But we've done the logic model, we've done data-driven decision making. And so instead of going into all of these, we wanted to sort of ask you folks which area is the area you sort of want to discuss the most today. And so there should be a poll coming up, and you're gonna go ahead and select which of these components do you really want to discuss and get into with each other today. And then we're gonna focus on the top two. So again, we can really have some really great conversation and sharing of information like we've been doing so far. So it'd be really great if everybody could participate, because this is really going to drive the discussion forward. Awesome. Oh, look. So just prior to the session, Tracy and I were saying, like, what do we think? What's going to come up as the top two? What's going to come up as the top two? So we're interested to see if we were right or we were off track. Okay, we got 20 of our 30 participants, so about 66%. And it looks like our top two are collect and organize data. Oh, people are still completing it. And the next one is interpret information. So if everyone, I'm just going to wait a couple more seconds. So make sure we get everyone in. Again, if you have not done the needs assessment, please put in your 2 cents, because that's how we're going to select the conversation going forward. All right. Oh, okay. We got some people still coming in. So it looks like our top 3 are collect and organize data, interpret information, and determine priorities. Oh yeah. So Tracy put in, this is our mini in-session needs assessment. Okay, well, hey Tracy, looks like we were on the money regarding, and this is just really from Tracy and I's prior like experience, instead of like the challenges that we actually faced at doing needs assessment in our own work. And so it looks like our top 2 are going to be on collect and organize data and interpret information. And so I think Tracy's going to take the first one, and then I'll take interpreted information. Does that sound like a plan, Tracy?
Sounds good. Sounds good.
Okay.
Yeah, so on the screen now, we've highlighted our top choice, collect and organize data, and included just a few things on the screen that happen or take place, and tasks or considerations that take place in this particular step of organizing and collecting data. You know, we've talked a little bit already about different methods of collecting data. I heard examples of both that qualitative data from interviews and focus groups, as well as quantitative data, or data that can be quantified, such as surveys, or maybe student assessment data, or behavioral health survey data. It might also include demographic data. But really, one of the most important things here, and we did touch on it just briefly at the top of the session, is making sure that you have that guiding framework or questions or topics, so that you can align your data sources and perhaps even your questions, right? Align to those questions that you're trying to answer, aligning the questions of a survey or a focus group to those topic areas that you want to learn more about. You might consider what data is existing already. Maybe there's, maybe either you're working closely with schools or other organizations that already have some data that you can tap into. You might need to consider collecting new data, though, as well. Ensuring that all your stakeholders are represented in the data. Whose voice do you need to hear from when you're collecting data? I heard, just in the examples that you shared so far, I've heard, elders, youth, school administrators, and I'm sure you can think of others as well. And then a really important piece of this too, especially if you're doing a collaborative needs assessment, where you're engaging your stakeholders in that process of interpreting data. And I know we'll talk a little bit more in depth about that, but in this stage, you're thinking about that because you want to organize all that data that you collect, right, in a way that's digestible, that people can make sense of it. And sometimes there's a little bit of coaching involved with that too. And maybe some of you have some experiences along those lines, but just want to open it up to you now and hear from you. What about this step or these action items do you find challenging? Or maybe what successes have you had? What were some lessons learned as you worked through this step? Or if you're just thinking about getting ready for a needs assessment, maybe you have some questions about how to go about something. Feel free to type in the chat or come off mute.
Oh, looks like Ryan raised his hand.
Oh. Go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah, so the question I had is if anyone had suggestions on how to collect this data without providing some sort of benefits, immediate benefit. We've struggled with gathering data unless we provide a gift card or some sort of incentive. So I was curious if anyone had any ways that it worked for them in the past without providing an incentive. And also a follow-up to that would be, we have trust land all across our state, as well as we have these members who have needs all across the country. So when you have so many people in different areas, is there a way to break down the needs for certain districts, or how do you go about that different data?
Well, we couldn't provide an incentive. I think if we did, we probably would have had more responses. So what we ended up doing was we put our community values is why we are doing this work. First and foremost, we explain that's why we are doing this. And then we had this little tagline of we work together to make sure the children come first. And that seemed to be able to get people to want to participate and stuff. You know, we have in our communities about 309 Alaska Native families. And, you know, I was pretty happy with the results that we got back from the parents just by putting a positive spin on why we needed to do this. And we also worked with local community staff to let them know, could you just, you know, this is a positive spin we want to put on it, and that and to let everyone know that their input was so valuable to make sure that we were providing what their children needed. And I think that helped. It was, it was a struggle, but it helped.
This is Allison from the Blake Rancheria. I agree with what Laura said, definitely, about making sure that you put on there that this information is going to be used to better programs for the children. That really helps people to respond. But also, as we were developing our plan for communication for inclusivity, one of the things that came up was that having someone in the community that is trusted actually reach out to people personally and say, hey, we really need you to do this because of these reasons. So kind of preparing something for that elder or that trusted person to say and provide it to them, and then provide them either the flyer or the computer link or whatever to the needs assessment. We've gotten much better at communicating through those means. Social media is wonderful. Facebook is great. People see that, but it's not always getting everybody. And we need to make sure we include more people to make sure we're getting a true needs assessment. So actually having a person in each of the villages, each of our tribal areas, to be able to talk to them and say, hey, can you please do this for us? That's how we're getting our responses now. Anyway.
That's awesome, Allison.
Yeah, I think I'm taking that like as like an influencer almost in certain areas to spread that word or to get buy-in for it. And I also love the thought of the tagline of having something that could get people motivated or at least interested in spreading the word for you.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that influencer idea is really an interesting one, right? Because a lot of times we think of the online influencers around, but really we've been doing that in community for so long, is connecting with that influencer to get other people, to encourage other people to participate. Great idea.
I'm curious if anybody has any thoughts about like the window of data collection, right? Because it does take time. If you had any insights or that you gleaned from collecting this data, it takes time to build trust, right? And maybe having a trusted community member engaged is one way to help expedite that. But I don't know, just wanted to put that out there if there are any other thoughts on that front.
Are you asking Tracy about how long to allow for a community needs assessment? Like how long to put that document out there to receive information, like a cutoff time?
Maybe, yeah.
Well, just as a general practice, and I don't remember exactly if I learned this in school or if this was one of Zig Ziglar's tips from way back in the day, but you're supposed to have, like, nothing should take more than 6 weeks. 6 weeks is usually, if you go much longer than that, people are gonna forget about it, other things come up. But if you have a 6-week time frame from the moment you announce it to the moment you close it, and you're pushing that entire time with weekly posts and your weekly calls to your influencer, 6 weeks, you should be able to harness and get as many people as you can in that 6-week period. Other than that, you're going to start dragging on and on and on. And then you've got to have time to analyze that data and then react on it. So if you wait too long, then how responsive are you going to be, especially if there are immediate needs identified in the needs assessment? So you don't want to let it go for a year. You don't want to let it go for 6 months. You're going to start having stale data by that time. I can't remember whose rule of thumb it was, but I really think 6 weeks is a good time frame.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's really great, Allison. That reminds me of when, like, you do a capital campaign, right? There's a silent phase where you're getting the bulk of your money. So during the silent phase, you're really collecting all the data that you can get your hands on. And then there's a public phase which is shorter and very like a discrete time period where now the public is engaged and you're going out to stakeholders. But to them, it looks like it's only this amount of time, but it's actually been, a longer because you're collecting the data. That's a great example.
You're exactly right. That is kind of where my brain went.
We were there.
Good. Well, I'm watching the clock here too, and I want to make sure we have time to also talk about the interpretation of the data. So before we move on, are there any other challenges or questions that you wanted to bring to the group about this topic?
Trinidad is asking what would be too short of a time period or a minimum? That's a good question. Any thoughts?
I'd say that has to depend on how many members we're talking about, what kind of size, area, and then also just mentioning the impact framework and what are you looking at exactly for that. So I guess it depends on what exactly is the need assessment being done.
Yeah. Yep. Good one.
Yeah, sometimes in my experience too, we're depending on how we're getting the information, if it's a survey or a focus group, we're aiming for a certain response rate or engagement, and we have a lot of times too when we're planning, we'll say, well, this is what we're aiming for, but if we need to extend it, if we need to extend that window by a couple of days or a week, there's like a backup plan if we don't hit that mark. Okay. Good questions. I want to make sure we have time to get into the next one too. Interpret information was the other one that had the next highest responses. Is that right, Olani?
Yeah, it was. And so really when we look at, again, interpreting needs assessment data, this again could be your assets or maybe the gaps. Really, once you've collected the data, looking at developing different observations or statements related to the data, identifying themes across the various data sources that you've collected, making inferences, and then summarizing findings. And so again, we just sort of want to throw out to you folks, this was your second priority. Well, what about this step or action item is challenging, or what have you maybe done in the past that really worked or maybe didn't work, and you'd like to cue somebody in about like, hey, we tried this, but it didn't work. So maybe think about, doing something else as it relates to interpreting data and the information. So again, please come off mute, share with each other, even put it in the chat. I worked in a Hawaiian immersion charter school, and this was really what I realized in interpreting information was that for the teachers we had, we first need to make sure the data was easily understandable. And then the other thing I learned is that we actually did have to provide training for them to be able to do the function of interpreting information. And so that was something I learned. If I could go back and redo, I would build that piece into the needs assessment process.
So I just want to share real quickly. Before I got into this position at OIE, I was an NYCP director. And then before that, I was a teacher. So I've been collecting data forever. So to kind of go back and to share with you all what I did with our NYCP program. In collecting the data, going back to Ryan's question too, getting people involved, we had 5 schools in the district that I worked with. We had 70% Native Americans within that school district, 37 different tribes represented. There were 7 tribes that were local, and there's 39 tribes all over in Oklahoma. So we focused on each school. And in our data collection, we used Google Forms. You can use Microsoft Forms, whatever form you want to use. But we mainly, we made sure we gathered the data from and marked each school. So there's 5 schools. If they were a community member, a tribal administrator, if they were a student, if they were a parent, if they were a school administrator, teacher, so we could break it down, break the data down like that as well. And then we went through, and it was a lot of footwork though, but we went to had meetings with the tribal administrators, the education administrators. We set up booths. We talked to the school administrators, the staff, the teachers. We set up a booth at the beginning of the back to school, when kiddos came back to school and prepared to go back, and they have to fill out all the paperwork. We gave them our form as well. So we made it a paper form. We made it a easily accessible Google form. So we just did a lot of footwork and asked questions, and those specific types of questions or needs went on our form, such as for our students, how do you feel? Do you feel safe in school? Do you feel like your culture is being represented in school? Do you feel like the teachers are culturally responsible? So we went through all of those different types of questions. One of the biggest things that we did in order to get our parents and our community and our tribal community involved was gather the data that the school already had. Here's our data, guys. Look where our kids are. Look where our kids that we're going to help. Look where they are. And look where everyone else is. How do we close that gap? What can we do collectively to close that gap? So whenever we did get the information back from our needs assessment, when we started to interpret that data, we looked at the highest priority district-wise. We looked at the highest priority school-wise, and we just went from there. That's what our program is going to focus on. For each school had their own focus, and then we had a district focus. But we brought our tribal leaders in with our LEAs to discuss these needs collectively.
Donna, I had a
Awesome.
question on that you just said, Donna. When you were using the school's data, did you have any issues with not being able to get further data because the sampling size was too small? Because sometimes I've been trying to find the data and they're like, if we identify this, you'll be able to identify the student because that student is one of maybe 5 in this grade level. You know what I mean? There's the low, because we serve a multitude of low density schools. Our data doesn't seem to, I can't get too much deeper than like this general data.
I use the state's website because it's public data. So any of that information was public information, and our state broke things down by demographics as well. So we were able to break down everything per school, what the demographics are, even discipline-wise, what those demographics are. And the school should be able to share that with you as well, because they shouldn't have anything that they're sharing public, with each student's name on there.
Yeah, I mean, there's
use that data from the state. The school should have all of that data. It's public information besides, without using the kiddos' names.
okay. I'll try.
Awesome. What I really got out of Donna, your sharing is that really you had that whole system like embedded, the needs assessment was embedded into sort of all the different processes, whether it comes to like your first day packet or connecting to the data, it was just embedded into systems that were already going on, which is probably the most effective and efficient way to go about this whole process. Are there any other questions or insights, maybe lessons learned related to interpreting the information connected to the data? Okay. If not,
I just
go
wanted
ahead.
to kind of maybe probe a little bit on the idea of data sharing, because I know this is it definitely was something that was talked about in the project directors meeting too, the idea of data sovereignty. And I'm wondering if anybody has any successes or examples of maybe some data sharing agreements or MOUs that enabled you to get at some of that hard to get data.
For ours, and this will go back to Allison's question, we did an MOU that specifically stated that the school would share important data with us involving, us bringing the grant in and sharing things like that. So MOU, we did the MOU.
It looks like Jennifer, they have a data agreement example. Oh, she said would be helpful. Okay, so maybe we can go ahead and maybe look, maybe Tracy and I can find maybe an example, and then at our next talking circle, maybe following up when this notes and the video gets sent out, we can attach that to there, maybe just an example of a data sharing agreement or MOU. But we want to make sure we get to the needs assessment tool. So Tracy and I just sort of did some research on some different types of tools that are out there. And so we're just going to go ahead and share that now.
Yeah, and while I'm sharing these and putting them on the screen here, I think we have some actual links and some PDFs that will drop into the chat box as well, so that you can look these up or download them right here while we're talking about them. So this first one here is from Indigenous Climate Action. It's a really nice example of an approach that this program took using an indigenous, or what they termed as a decolonial approach to conducting a needs assessment. And they really leaned into engaging and uplifting the voices of the youth in this particular program. And so it's a really great story and some really nice examples in there. The other thing that they do in this report is they really show and articulate how this needs assessment will inform continued work. So that's a nice example. If you want some inspiration, that's a good read. This example here is from a federally funded center called the State Support Network. This is actually a needs assessment guidebook. This really leans into the idea of a collaborative needs assessment and how we can engage stakeholders in every step of the needs assessment process. There are process guidance and tips for each of those steps. This guidebook provides some guiding questions and considerations for planning and carrying out each step. The other thing that might be helpful if you're working with schools or in districts too, is the front matter of this guidebook also includes the references in the Every Student Succeeds Act, where needs assessments are referenced and where schools and districts are required to conduct needs assessments. And so, going back to the idea earlier in our session today about maybe being able to connect with other needs assessments that have happened, that might be some useful information in there. This resource here is a two-page PDF, but strivetogether.org will give you more information about that particular program. This document outlines steps again for that for collaborative improvement process and engaging other stakeholders in the community in that to really create systemic change and build that shared understanding. It does provide some steps, a framework and some steps for assessing needs. One of those steps being the, after you go through that process of identifying needs and prioritizing needs, one of those steps that they include is that short cycle plan, do, study, act to test your strategies before really scaling them up. So this might be like something interesting if you're looking at finding something that works and then being able to build that out. This example here, this actually comes from the Institute for Education Sciences and the the Regional Educational Laboratory Network, specifically the REL Central that serves like Colorado and some of the surrounding states there. But this document actually has some surveys that have been developed and tested specifically in American Indian communities. This gives guidance about how to, how to administer the surveys, how you might modify the survey for your specific context. Some of the topics that are included in the survey, there's one for teachers and there's one for administrators in here. So it is focused at the school level, but it looks at culturally responsive instruction, the degree to which classroom practices are inclusive of American Indian perspectives, and state-specific American Indian instruction. It also gets into school climate, equity, attendance, socio-emotional well-being. So if you're looking for an existing survey, this might be a really good tool. And then finally, this is a resource. This I don't have a PDF specific for you because it's actually a great website with a number of tools and resources here. And the context of this tool is around 21st century learning centers, but many of these tools can be modified for your specific context. It really leans into that that part about engaging youth in that needs assessment process. And there's some good guidance on there, including a mini lesson and a podcast, you know, for how to use these resources. And then you see there some of the tools that it actually includes as well, some other surveys or group discussion guidelines if you're looking for tools to help you gather some data. And if you have any other tools that you've found useful, please feel free to drop those into the chat box. I'll pause now and take some time for questions. If you have any questions for us, we want to make sure that we have time to answer. If anybody's got anything you want to come off mute, maybe. All right. Still open for questions. Feel free to drop them into the chat box. We're going to go ahead and move through some of our last slides here. We have our end of session poll for you. We have just a few extra questions than maybe what we've done in the past. So this will be our one and only data collection here from you. You can tell us what was useful about this session. So you should see that poll pop up on your screen right now. I'm going to leave that up on the screen while I talk through a few of these other slides here while we finish up. We value your feedback and we use that information to improve these sessions for you. Something that's coming up, an event that we have coming up. If you're a project director, you may have already received an email announcing this event. This is a training that will happen on August 4th between 2 and 5 p.m. Eastern Time. We have limited space in here, so please, if you want to attend and participate in the True Colors training, we encourage you to register as soon as possible. This is a really interactive session. I know 2 to 5 sounds like a long time, but I promise you this is something that'll go really quickly. It'll be very engaging. This is a training that's really about learning about the interpersonal communication styles and how that impacts group dynamics and how you can really lean into those differences as strengths to help overcome barriers or challenges on your team. So I see the registration link is in the chat box now. We definitely would like you to consider participating in that. All right. And then we also have a grantee satisfaction survey. And I think, Donna, did you want to say a few words about this?
Yeah. So if you're a project, if you're the program director or the certifying official, I think it just went out to our program directors. You should have received a grantee satisfaction survey in your email. It may have gone to your spam, but this is important for us to just to help you all. It's just, how are we doing on our TA services? How are we doing as a OIE and helping you? So make sure that you fill this out and send it back in. If you did not get this, let us know and we'll make sure that it gets to you.
Thank you. Okay. So some of our regularly scheduled events that are also coming up, we've got office hours this month at the end of July on the 29th. This is just a drop in, drop out kind of event. If you have any questions, if you want some FaceTime with OIE, this is a great opportunity to get some questions answered. You can pop in there at your leisure. And then of course our next talking stick session will be on August 12th at our normal time of 3 p.m. Eastern. All right. And of course, our always want to share with you, make sure you have the contact information for your program officers if you need it. And a friendly reminder to always please put that your grantee name and that PER number into your emails when you're emailing OIE. That'll help make sure that they're tracked and responded to in a timely manner. So thank you for that. And I see our office hours link is in the chat box as well, in case you need that. All right. Well, it's right at the top of the hour. So thank you for all the great sharing today. I really appreciate all of your sharing your experience and lifting up questions and making the most of our time together. So thank you so much.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much. That was great.
Oh, good. I'm glad
Thank
you liked
you.
that.